in the Housing Committee for the past 6 years until my recent appointment as the Senate ranking leader of the Planning and Development Committee, with cognizance on matters related to local governance, housing, urban renewal, and metropolitan districts, and ultimately balancing state controls against the concept of home rule in our local communities and planning and zoning. I do believe that we need sustainable solutions to address critical housing needs in our state. These challenges are faced by not just suburban communities, but cities and rural areas as well. I truly believe that our solutions can be found when we all collaborate together. And when I say all, I want all shareholders vis-a-vis federal, state, local government, and the passionate and well-intentioned housing advocates. We all have to work together. And my sincere objective is to share and engage and inform all the shareholders to try to create solutions. So I'm very eager to begin this process, and I want to introduce to you my co-host in this town hall, Representative Kimberly Fiorello. Hi, Kimberly.
Hi there. Thank you so much. I'm very honored to co-host this with you, Senator Hwang, and I'm grateful for the opportunity always to serve my community. A few thoughts is home rule. What is this about? It is a cultural mindset, but it is also state statute. In my new office at the legislative building, I have a bookshelf with about 20 volumes that make up the general statute. And tonight we're going to talk about a sliver of that general statute, Title 8, Section 2, the Zoning Enabling Act. It was passed in 1959 as a part of a series of laws related to a home rule movement that was basically the state legislature getting tired of dealing with very minute, super detailed local issues coming before them and saying maybe these are better dealt with at the local level. So 8-2 in particular says towns can set up local zoning boards and deal with zoning on their own. And most of our towns have done that. I do believe we have 2 towns in Connecticut that have declined and still to this day have no zoning. But fast forward to 1990, and then we have Title 8, Section 30G, 8-30G. This passes, and it is about affordable housing. And it did 2 main things. One, it gave as-of-right privileges to developers of affordable housing, allowing them to bypass many of the local zoning ordinances in each town. And 2, it put an onus on towns to reach a 10% of its housing stock to be officially affordable as defined by the law. But 30 years later, of the 169 towns in Connecticut, only 30 have met the 10% threshold. And 830G has many unintended consequences that have frustrated residents and builders and more. That is the current lay of the land on this topic of zoning. But why does zoning hit so many of us? I mean, enough that this town hall was oversubscribed. And I think that's because literally our homes are often our most significant purchase and most important investment. So when zoning challenges come to our neighborhood, we care. And zoning can cut both ways for private property rights. It can infringe and it can protect. Individual rights are property rights are individual rights, and zoning can be our friend or our foe when it comes to these rights. But what does the new slate of zoning laws want? Apologies, I have dogs. In brief, the proponents of some of these new ideas are saying that our local zoning boards are not getting it right. They say that we need statewide uniform zoning standards and more as-of-right privileges to builders. This will simplify zoning for all and unleash economic prosperity across our state. Yes, we have family members and neighbors getting old and downsizing. We have younger people looking for starter homes, people who want shorter commutes, divorcees looking for affordable options, and many people who want options to move to new opportunities. But I propose that these folks are looking for a bigger picture of prosperity in Connecticut. More jobs, more homes that grow in value, more good schools, more safe neighborhoods, and more beautiful nature. So a key question I hope we keep in mind as we have this amazing conversation with local leaders is, Who do you trust to make local zoning guidelines and standards in your town, or central office in Hartford? I so agree with the sentiment that it takes a village or a town or a city, but not a massive bureaucracy far away. And I really look forward to this conversation.
Thank you. And if I may ask of you, Kimberly, if you could, or Representative Fiorello, if you could introduce your colleagues and friends on the Greenwich town government. And I think the theme of the question is, how does 8-2 and your experiences on 30G impacted their role in their community? And number two, to be able to also talk about some of the work that they're working on to find solutions to addressing these kind of challenges and issues. So, Kimberly, if you could, please introduce your colleagues.
Absolutely. Thank you. I'm really honored to introduce these wonderful people. We have Fred Camillo, who, having served as the state representative for the 151st District for 11 years and as the assistant minority leader, is now the first selectman of the town of Greenwich. And his professional experience is as a small business owner, and he has worked as a local high school teacher, baseball coach, and mortgage banker, and he is much beloved. Fred, if you don't mind, I'll go ahead and give you the time to say a few words, because I know you will have to drop.
Thank you very much,
Ready.
Representative Fiorello. Thank you so much for those kind words, and thank you for your service, and thank you and to my old friend Senator Hwang for putting this together. Tony and I lived many miles in the state of Connecticut, and he showed me a lot of good restaurants along the way that to this day I will never forget. So thank you, Tony. Those are good times.
I miss you, Freddie.
I miss you too. And I just want to really salute the work that our Planning and Zoning Commissioner, Margarita Albin, has done, and along with Francis, really working on this issue. I know that Tony and I had worked on this for many years in the state legislature. Back, I don't know if it was 2009 or 10 or 11, I had put a bill in before the Housing Committee that would have allowed existing units to be counted towards the 10% mandate that were not and still are not counted. And even though it got a public hearing, obviously it was not voted out of the committee, but we think Greenwich is committed to doing the right thing, but we also believe strongly in local control. And certainly we believe there are lots of other ways to address this issue, and including the fact that we all think pretty strongly believe that we actually have that number already, but they're just not counted. We have lots of schools and the hospital that has bought many units in town that we think would fall under that definition that just aren't counted. But we want to be a partner at the table. We want to do the right thing, but we also want to, as you say, adhere to the great principle of local and home rule here in our state. So I can't thank you all enough for the work that you're doing in your respective roles, and know that you'll always have a willing participant here in Greenwich to assist and be engaged in the dialogue. So thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Freddie.
you so much. Thank you, Fred. I'll introduce Margarita and Sam Romeo, and the two of you can take a moment to say a few words. But Margarita Albin is the chair of the Greenwich Planning and Zoning Commission. She has served on this commission since 2006. She's a former executive at ExxonMobil who holds an MBA in management and a postgraduate degree in accounting. She has volunteered as an emergency medical technician, therapy dog handler, and ESL tutor. Margarita has restored historic homes and has an abiding interest in historic preservation and environmental protection. An immigrant from Ecuador, she is bilingual in Spanish and English and speaks French. And Mr. Sam Romeo currently serves as the chairman of the Greenwich Communities, formerly known as Greenwich Housing Authority, and he is a board member of the Greenwich Emergency Medical Service. He is also a certified first responder for the Department of Homeland Security in our town. He served on the Greenwich RTM for 20 years and as chair of the Land Use Committee. He's extremely knowledgeable about the town as a 77-year resident of Greenwich. But thank you both for coming on today.
Thank you.
And if you both could share the question that was raised earlier, that how does 8-2 and Representative Fiorello's terrific explanation of home rule and in your role as planning and development, planning and zoning, and Sam in your long work on behalf of housing solutions in the community, and how has 830G impacted the job that you've had to do, and ultimately also, as I said, for all the other community leaders that I'll ask the same question is, what are some of the solutions and efforts that you are undertaking and the challenges that you have? So if we could begin with Margarita, and just share in your role, and I'm curious, how many years have you been on the Planning and Zoning Committee? Margarita, you got to unmute. Welcome to the world of Zoom.
There, it finally let me. It wasn't letting me unmute. Sorry. So 15 years I've been on planning and zoning. I think that Kim and Fred put it so eloquently that I'm going to go some more steps beyond that, that the 8-2 empowers towns to set their own regulations about what happens and what the development looks like in their communities. And there's another process that's very important in that, which is that every 10 years, we write what's called the Plan of Conservation and Development, and we go to the residents of our community and we ask them what they want. That informs the document, which then informs how we do the regulations and how we move forward. So it's about the decisions being made by the residents themselves and setting the path for their communities, and that's what we're enabled to do at this moment in Connecticut. In our case, once we wrote the Plan of Conservation and Development, we had identified a need for more diverse housing. And we started a task force to address that challenge. And we've been working with Sam, we've been working with developers, we've been working with people who are experts in below market rate financing. And we're looking at what we can do to make Greenwich more inclusive and more diverse in terms of the people to whom we offer housing. But it's all, I always say it's a circle, that we write the regulations, that it comes all the way down to the residents, deciding what direction they want their town to go in. And that's what makes the most sense. And that's what democracy is really about. So I don't think I can say anything more than that, Tony, unless you want me to talk about what we regulate, how big a lot is, how tall a building is, all of that, and then we approve applications for development individually. How about that?
No, I'm sure we're going to get some questions. We've gotten a plethora of questions that we'll address to the panelists. But Sam, I mean, I think Kim let the cat out of the bag. I thought you were 55, and then he says you've been living there for 75 years. So please, Sam, I mean, your commitment to public service, even before our interactions on housing authorities, is well recognized. So thank you, Sam.
I've seen a lot of changes here in the town of Greenwich, and quite frankly, 830G has created.
Sam, can you speak into the computer a little bit?
All right, try this.
A little louder.
And I'm on mute, right? Okay. 830G, how's that? Is that better? Or maybe I turn my volume up. Let's see. Okay. Are we all right?
Just make do. Go ahead, Sam. Sorry.
830G has made our job more difficult here in the town of Greenwich. And the reason I say that is that developers come in with a different mindset than we do at the Housing Authority. We're here to build quality housing at the least amount of cost. And developers come in using 830G as a hammer to try to max out every square foot of the property that they have and make the most amount of money on it. We're not in it to make the money. We're in it to provide affordable housing in the town. We do have land available that we've had municipal improvements approved on. So we can build here in Greenwich up to another probably 300 more affordable units in the town of Greenwich. And I happen to think that Greenwich is probably one of the most diverse towns in Fairfield County. We manage about 1,250 units of affordable housing, which drives people crazy when I tell them that when I travel around the state. They can't believe that, you know, in the town of Greenwich, so, you know, it's the Gold Coast, and that we have that many units of affordable housing. But developers, like I say, have a different mindset. And I don't want to see one size fit all in the state. And that's where the state is going, where they're going to have total control over our zoning. What makes our town and our community what it is its tax base. And the tax base comes from having different zoning laws and different zones to build housing. And that comes to health and welfare, which Margarita takes into account when they approve zoning applications. We need water, sewer, transportation. Excuse me. All the things come into effect. Now, when it comes to the state of Connecticut, they give out a lot of money, a lot of grants to build housing in rural areas where really nobody lives, open land. There are no factories. People have to, you know, travel in cars because there's no public transportation where they're building. And a lot of these buildings that the state has funded remain empty, from what I understand. They're still not fully occupied because no one lives in the area where they're building the properties. I think the state should be focused on, you know, more bonding and subsidizing areas such as the town of Greenwich, because Greenwich really fights for money to help build our developments, but most of the money goes to Bridgeport, Hartford, New Haven, and it doesn't come back to Greenwich. You know, we're kind of treated like stepchildren down here because we're supposed to be the wealthy town, and, you know, we don't need it. But we do more to provide upgrades and housing in the state. The one problem with 830G in this affordable housing bill that the state created was that no town can ever meet the 10% requirement, because every time you build more units, the goalpost gets moved. So it's going to be a never-ending battle.
Sam, if I may, you're having audio challenges. We really can't hear you. So I'm going to see if we can try to fix it. Welcome to the world of Zoom. Dogs barking in the background and everything. It's the reality we're living with. Let me go to State Representative Terry Wood, who represents Darien and has been a long-time advocate of many of these issues. So if I may, Representative Wood, please welcome, and please also introduce our next speaker as well, if you wouldn't mind.
I'd be delighted to, Tony. Thank you. And I represent Norwalk and Darien. So having both communities gives a real strong overview of housing in this area. And I'd also like to say that strong sentiment out of state, according to recent polling, is everyone, I think it was like 80 to 90% of the people in this state want a bottom-up government. They don't want a heavy-handed top-down bureaucracy. And state control local zoning would be just that. So it's a great pleasure to introduce Jamie Stevenson, who's First Selectman of Darien. She was recently chairman of WestCog, which is our Council of Government, and she's also vice chair of Connecticut Conference of Municipalities. She's been Darien's First Selectman for almost 10 years, 5 terms, and a selectman before that. And I will tell you, there's no better leader for our town, and I'm very, very proud to introduce Jamie Stevenson. Thank you.
Welcome, Jamie. What a wonderful introduction, Representative Wood.
Thank you so much, Terry. Dear friend Terry, Senator Hwang, Representative Fiorello, friends and colleagues on this call, I'm super anxious to hear from our Executive Director of WestCog, Francis Pickering, who he and his staff have done a lot of work in this space. But, Senator, to address some of your immediate questions, challenges of 830G. I think Darien was really the first town on the map that was sort of, in the center of the bullseye for 830G, quite frankly. And what we've seen two things: some very successful and non-controversial 830G applications because they were proposed in the right place and with the right amount of density. And then we've seen developers that have no interest in actually building one unit of housing, simply looking to rezone a piece of land, turn it over to make a profit, and leave the development for someone else's problem. That most recent project ended up in court. The court adjudicated, the town lost, and we ended up with a project. It was an 830G that's owner occupied at rates that no one could afford, quite frankly. So we've had success and we've had failures. I believe strongly in market-driven solutions, and Darien has been extremely successful, even in spite of the financial crisis of 2007 and 8, and through the pandemic. Our Planning and Zoning Commission works very closely with developers to help when rezoning is necessary. And I think it's very interesting that we're talking about top-down state control of local zoning on one hand, but on the other hand, we hear every day about the importance of democracy. And fundamental to this effort is that we work for the people. I'm elected to serve the people, as of most of the people on this call. So we need to hear from the people and do what they want for us. And the best way to do that is bottom-up government, as Terry so well stated. Some other solutions that we've had in Darien: we have inclusionary zoning regulation, which has been very successful. And from a high level, what that means is for multifamily developments, a certain percentage of the units in those multifamily developments have to be set aside as affordable. And we've been very successful in growing our stock of affordable housing throughout town with this regulation. So that's something that I really do support and hope the state will take a look at that. And we strongly support our local housing authority to build deeply affordable housing for those that need it. So I believe in housing diversity. I just believe in market-driven solutions rather than top-down state-mandated solutions. So thank you for having me on this call. I'm happy to answer any questions and look forward to hearing from my other colleagues.
Thank you. I want to introduce First Selectman Kevin Moynihan of New Canaan, and I want to give a prop to Kevin that he actually reshuffled a couple of scheduled appointments that he had to join us, so I'm really appreciative. And Kevin comes to us through State Representative Tom O'Day, who speaks so highly of Kevin's work, and even before he became First Selectman was always involved in the community through nonprofit organizations and philanthropy. And very involved in intimately connected to the town of New Canaan. So, Kevin, I really appreciate you taking the time to joining us to offer your viewpoints, and credit needs to be given to Tom O'Day for making the call and inviting you, persuading you to join us. So thank you, Kevin, for joining us.
Thank you, Tony. I appreciate that introduction, and it's a pleasure to be with you, all my friends on this call. And, in New Canaan, we've striven hard for the past 40 years, really, to build affordable housing, and we instituted a developer fee when developers build something in town, they pay money into a fund that we have equity available to sponsor new affordable housing units. We haven't had a particular problem with 830G because we generally, first of all, we are primarily a single family housing town, but we have 900 condominium units that were built back in the 60s and 70s. So we have a great deal of housing that's available to lower income and seniors on fixed incomes. And we also have, we've been upgrading affordable housing units that were built in the 50s and 60s. And we're currently underway with a new project to expand a project that was 60 units. We're going to totally redevelop it to be 100 units. So because of the developer fee that we instituted and the attitude that we want to achieve more affordable housing, we've been very successful in building very nice affordable housing units. But you know, the reality is it's an economic issue. It's tough to make high cost communities be affordable to residents who want to live here. We don't have public transportation to New Canaan, and it's really hard to facilitate affordable housing when the costs of living are so high in general. So while we certainly support the goal, and we worked hard to accomplish, strive toward our 10% goal, it's really a matter of economics, in my view. You know, you can't change economics. The law of markets really determines where things come out, and so I think that's my general thought about this. And this legislation would take control away from the local communities. Doesn't seem to be, be much more constructive to have things that will continue to constructively build more affordable housing in all of our communities.
Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate your time, and obviously you work very closely with your local planning and zoning board. You're interconnected, and as a good town leader, you're very engaged, and I know you speak very highly of your planning and zoning board. Let me make a pivot to Francis Pickering. Francis is the executive director of the Western Connecticut Council of Government, WestCOG. And I'm going to pivot by asking Francis that describe a little bit of who WestCOG is, your representative members, but also, Francis, talk about some of the current proposals that are forthcoming in the General Assembly beyond what our first selectmen and planning and zoning and officials before you have spoken. What would the current proposals and some of the nuances of it impact our municipalities moving forward, and to be able to share with our audience? Because the most important thing we want to try to do is inform, educate, and begin a conversation where all the facts and information are available. So please, Francis, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Senator Hwang. I'm pleased to be here. Yes, I'm the executive director of the Western Connecticut Council of Governments. We serve 18 municipalities, 3 central cities of Stamford, Newark, and Danbury, and 15 surrounding towns in a region stretching from Greenwich to Westport and north to New Milford and Newtown. We're one of 9 statutorily designated regional councils of governments. And our purpose really is to serve as a forum to facilitate cooperation among municipalities in the state. As you know, Connecticut doesn't have county government, but there are some advantages to towns working together. Together, we can do wonderful things. Historically, the councils of governments have been involved in planning and zoning through what's called the referral process. And the referral process is kind of zoning writ large. In the referral process, a community that is proposing a zone change submits it to the COG for review. And the purpose is to ensure that whatever change the town or city is proposing doesn't have an adverse effect, or as an economist might say, create negative externalities on its neighbors. So you are not building a factory upstream and the downstairs neighbors then receive all the pollution. You are not building a shopping mall on the town line and all the traffic goes across the town line. This is very similar to the basis of zoning, which dates back to the progressive era in the early 20th century, when we had very congested cities. We had slums, we had factories, cheek and jowl with housing, and people living, frankly, in squalid conditions. And zoning was created to create some distance between uses, to avoid conflict, to avoid spillover effects. And that's why it's so important, and that's why we continue to look at it and continue to discuss it until this day. If you look at the proposals that have been discussed most recently, I'm not sure if you're interested more in Saad Anwar's bill from last summer or the most recent incarnation thereof coming from DeSegregate CT, but they revisit the relationship between the towns and the state with respect to land use. Historically, the state of Connecticut has delegated land use authority to the towns, as you know, And this would essentially take back some of that power. It's very troubling to me. We've seen a lot of attacks on democracy in the last few days, and we are concerned that this could also be backsliding with response to what usually people in these positions promote, which is local participatory decision making. The reason why it's so important for planning and zoning to be local is that I don't want to say that every town is incomparable to every other town, but we know there are differences. We know that some towns are full of wetlands and some towns are on top of ridge lines, and you cannot put the same buildings or people in those locations because they'll sink or they'll fall off the building, off the ridge line. The proposals before us essentially would bind the hands of planning and zoning commissions. It would not. A lot of this is coming from a feeling that 830G has failed to deliver on its promise. I'm not aware of any studies that have demonstrated that have actually empirically looked at 830G and asked why hasn't it worked and how can we fix it? Instead, this creates a parallel framework leaving 830G in place, and it would essentially compel municipalities to permit multifamily housing by right, so reduce public involvement and oversight in a variety of locations, primarily around train stations, bus rapid transit stations, and what is loosely defined as a commercial corridor, which is more or less the intersection of any two major roads. It uses the ownership of the road and the technical designation of the road as a means to determine whether higher density housing should go there. Furthermore, the approach, essentially, in addition to tying municipalities' hands, it limits their ability to conduct a thorough review of the project. So if you look at the state building code, which applies to all residential construction in Connecticut, it applies higher standards to multifamily housing. Now, this makes sense because multifamily housing is more complex. If you have a fire in an apartment building, it's much harder to escape from the top floor of an apartment building than it is to get out of a one-story house. Unfortunately, this proposal doesn't recognize that, and it would limit the fees that a municipality can charge, i.e. the amount of time it can spend reviewing these proposals. So what we see before us is a set of concepts that are designed to increase the supply of a certain type of housing, regardless of the appropriateness of that for the town, which the locals know best, and without any consideration of how this will impact 830G, whether it actually addresses the problems with 830G, whether it will even create more affordable housing, or whether it will just result in random condominium complexes falling out of the sky across our landscape and creating whatever negative impacts those may create. So that's essentially where we are right now.
Thank you so much, Francis. On your point that it limits a thorough review of projects, I wonder, Margarita, if you could comment on your meetings can run for hours, and you do conduct thorough reviews of projects with many residents and stakeholders that come forth. And as you go through this process, and you've served 15 years in P&Z, how important is it for neighborhood buy-in? And it's a complex process, but how important is the neighborhood buy-in?
Sorry, my dogs have stopped barking now. So neighborhood buy-in, neighborhood input is always important in that it can change some of the factors in an application. We can give the feedback to somebody. But the most important thing is that when an application comes before a planning and zoning commission, it must be consistent with the town's regulations. If a neighbor hates the application completely, that's not a reason for us to deny it. We can only deny something that does not conform to the local regulations. That's why the POCD is so important, because our regulations are written based on the community input. Once those regulations are in place, we obey them. But Francis is making a very important point about the evaluation, especially for health and safety, environmental issues, contamination. We have situations where wetlands are affected, where dangerous traffic situations may occur post-development. Those things require a thorough review by a commission. And that's what Francis is referring to, that is best done at a very local level. One of the initial DeSegregate proposals, this is the group of people who is writing a draft bill that Francis mentioned that is going to Hartford shortly. You should see it soon. Francis and I have, and Jamie, the three of us have seen the draft, and originally they looked to completely eliminate that decision-making authority from the local municipalities. It has evolved now that they are letting us maintain it, but there is still this impetus to move it away. And as Francis said, each community is different. Each one has a different set of issues that are complex. And that's what we are struggling to maintain. And the input that Jamie, Francis, and I have been giving regarding these draft bills. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. It does. Great.
Actually, very helpful, Margarita. But also, you are very involved in WestCog. Is that correct in regards to planning and zoning issues?
I'm laughing. Yes. In fact, it's not just me. The P&Z chairs in WestCog are very interested in what happens to zoning, and we have been working together across the region. And Francis has been instrumental in that effort. And we have been doing a lot of exchanging of best practices, which is again the great benefit of home rule. So, for example, New Canaan, Kevin Moynihan mentioned the fund that they have for developing affordable housing. Greenwich is consulting with them now on how they approached it, what they did, and how we could do something similar. Darien was one of the first towns to have inclusionary zoning. We've talked to Darien about how it's gone for them. We've also talked about things like Airbnb and how people are regulating them, short-term rentals, what they're doing with accessory apartments. And WestCog, our regional planning organization, has been instrumental because it enables the sharing of best practices in the community without a mandate from a central government. They don't tell us what to do, but they've got a guy who's got a basement full of every zoning regulation you can possibly imagine. And he helps us.
If I may, I actually have a question that wanted to share and get people's thoughts. I remember over 30 years ago, my wife and I looked at properties, and we experienced some aspects of redlining and exclusionary practices. You're going to hear a lot of this dialogue as we move forward. And I just really want to point out and raise the question with all of you, is the fact that race, social injustice is in the forefront. It's very near and dear to all of us. And there has been history throughout this country and throughout many towns in our state on race and prejudice. But in 2021, I know we still have work to do, but I ask of all of you in the important role of a community leader, it does exist, but I love to have your thoughts in a recognition and also a no tolerance of those type of beliefs and values and how you go about your decision making. And if it's okay, and I would also extend that to Representative Fiorello. I did want to ask that from the standpoint that it's out there, but also what the community has done and will continue to do, and express a no tolerance policy to those type of potential race and prejudice that may exist. Maybe I
think
can
it's a fabulous question.
Sure, thank you. That's a great question and very timely. I believe we all have a zero tolerance policy, and the federal government and the regulations that the federal government has put in place in terms of fair housing and the regulations under which real estate agents have to do their work currently really go a long way I'm not going to say this behavior is eradicated, but it's gone a long way with making it against the law to have that kind of divisive policy making. So in terms of the work at the town level and the planning and zoning level, we are mandated to follow all state statutes, all federal laws in crafting our local regulations. So, and further, from a community perspective, we all understand that diverse communities are healthy communities, and diversity in all forms, age diversity, racial diversity, economic diversity, really create a much more healthy community environment for everyone. And I think that we all support that initiative. And like I said, I'm sure it hasn't been eradicated. We're hearing a lot about it, but I would like to believe, and I do believe strongly, that in my community, it's largely rhetoric at this point for political gain, and not actually the reality of the decision, as part of the decision making that's happening in the town of Darien.
If I may pivot to Sam, maybe we fix Sam's audio and get him off mute. And obviously, Representative Wood and Representative Fiorello, I welcome your thoughts as well. But I wanted to get to Sam.
That much better?
We're working on it,
We can hear
Sam.
you.
You can hear me? Well, I have to agree with Jamie about it's more rhetoric, especially here in the town of Greenwich, because we're supposed to be, so wealthy. And during the summer, we had a group of individuals come down Greenwich Avenue while people were, having the outside dining, and make these accusations and destruction of the diners. And I took an offense to that, because I've been here all my life, and I've seen a lot of changes. I can't think of a more diverse and acceptable receiving town as the town of Greenwich. And when I see people, slinging the race card around here in town, I take it personal, because that doesn't happen here. We are a diverse town. We are a welcoming town. 90% of my residents in the housing are minorities. Yes, it exists. Maybe it's certain individuals, but not Greenwich as a whole. And Jamie, I think you have a great developer in your town, David Genovese.
We sure do.
And he's doing some work, and I've known David for quite some time now, and I've come to your planning and zoning meetings, and matter of fact, testified in one of his recent projects several years ago. So I've come to know Darien is doing a great job with creating affordable housing.
Well, Sam, you're a big integral part. You've devoted a significant portion of your life in public service in the housing and to create opportunities for everyone. So I really do appreciate hearing that and hearing you speak in those words, because you do it. You're there. You're representing the community. You're giving up many nights in trying to do the business to create opportunities for everyone. So
well, I have to say, Tony, we've turned a corner here in Greenwich, and I think the housing authority has a different face. Margarita, you can attest to that. We now, I think, have a respect that housing authorities didn't have here in the community. And if you come down and take a look at the recent developments we've done and accomplished and renovations over the last, 7 years, we've reinvested $26 million in upgrades and new housing. So it's a whole new housing authority. We've changed our name to represent the 21st century. And I think in the next 10 years, you're going to see another major boom in affordable housing here in Greenwich.
Margarita, Francis.
Francis.
Yes.
He's the brains in the outfit.
WestCog's analysis in regards to the real facts as relates to racial representation. I found one of the studies that WestCog shared has been very, very compelling. If you could articulate a little bit of that.
Happy to do so. And one of the challenges here, Tony, with what we see being proposed is that it's not exactly clear what it's addressing. Is it addressing racial segregation, economic segregation, a lack of affordable housing, or something else altogether? Right now, the proposals before us do not address racial segregation, as far as I can tell, potentially not economic segregation, and potentially not even affordable housing. It would just allow for more market rate housing construction, perhaps with an assumption that that would somehow address other issues. If we go back to the premise that this all started with, that Connecticut is racially segregated, and unusually so, Connecticut has been called the most or among the most racially segregated states. We have analyzed that data using data from the Census Bureau, which everybody uses, and found that not to be the case. Racial segregation exists across the country, but we are nowhere near an outlier. We are in the middle of the pack. Is the level of segregation we see more than we would like? That's a political discussion. It's one I can't weigh in on, but we are not an outlier. So a lot of what's been said really doesn't hold up under closer scrutiny. That's not to say we shouldn't work to further integration, economic, racial, ethnic, what have you, or have more diversity in our housing stock. We just need to question statements that are not attributed correctly, and that's what we've been doing. Another point I probably should make is that when we talk about affordable housing, the Fairfield County or the southwestern Connecticut is often made out to be the poster child for what's wrong with Connecticut. The reality is that, as many of the esteemed guests on this panel have mentioned, is that this is all driven by markets, and Connecticut really breaks into two markets. Part of the state is the New York City real estate market, and part is the rest of the state, which is more or less homogeneous. The challenge is that prices are different in those two markets, and so are jobs. In this discussion, we have been talking about race, ethnicity, economics, really, really big picture issues, and housing, but we've been leaving out a lot of other things. Most people don't move to a house because it's a house. They look for a job, and then for a school, and then they find a house that allows them to access the job, the school, the healthcare, the opportunities they need. We're leaving out the discussion about opportunity here. And part of the reason we see expensive housing relative to the rest of the state in our part of the state is because this is where the jobs are. This is where the economic growth is. If you look at the rest of the state, by our analysis, it has the cheapest housing of any high-income area in the entire country pre-COVID. We were cheaper than Phoenix. We were cheaper than Philadelphia. We were cheaper than Portland, Maine. We were cheaper than Las Vegas. All of this goes to show that we have some real problems when it comes to opportunity. We are not creating jobs. We are not providing a career ladder for low and moderate skilled people to work their way up and support their households. And because of that, we see this really large demand in our part of the state, simply because the jobs aren't around the rest of the state. And if we want to talk about racial justice and social equity, we also need to look at jobs and economic opportunity and not focus single-mindedly on housing. And when it comes to housing, not become obsessed with zoning. There are many other aspects to housing, economic aspects, that have been left out of this discussion altogether.
Yeah, Tony, I would really like to support everything that Francis just said. We are all looking for everyone in the state of Connecticut to have a great opportunity to live in a place that of their choosing, to have a great job, a well-paying job. It wasn't so long ago we were talking about the fallout from, the market devastation of 2007-8, and that the high-paying jobs left the state of Connecticut, replaced by low-wage service sector jobs. So I think it behooves, and I'm glad that you guys are up in Hartford doing this hard work. It behooves us to really look at our economy and job growth so that everyone in the state can prosper. We can't have this discussion, however, without talking about education. you know, we are fortunate. Many of us live in towns that prioritize the value of high quality public education. That's something that every parent in the state of Connecticut, whether you live in a small rural town or an urban center, wants for your children. And it would be the single greatest economic driver for the state of Connecticut for us to focus on bettering the educational outcomes in the areas that currently have outcomes that are quite frankly shouldn't be acceptable to the parents of those students. So there's a lot wrapped up in this discussion. Housing and zoning is but one small part. It's about the economy, it's about schools. But most of all, I think it should be driven by the people who live in those communities to make those self-determinations for themselves.
I think that's such a great point, Jamie. And on the topic of racism, you know, a real antidote to racism is individualism. And it very much stems from what Martin Luther King said, which is he wanted a world where people are judged by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. And to know the content of character takes time. But I wanted to return to Sam Romeo as well, because he is walking the walk, not just talking the talk, on getting to know the people in our community who have these needs. And he is addressing them and helping them. Sam, I wonder if you could speak a little more on what you see at Greenwich Communities and how it is that towns can address the very unique needs of each individual. And this has absolutely nothing to do with a segregationist mentality, but truly an embrace of the individuals that come to you and seek to live in Greenwich. And what do you see from the Greenwich communities?
Sam, you're on mute.
Okay, let me say this about the residents of Greenwich community. I really take them as my family. I interact with them on a daily basis. Most of them have my home and cell phone number. We've created programs within the Greenwich communities to help give people a hand up. We have a program that the state sponsors and works with us that we last year gave out close to $100,000 in money back to residents who joined our self-sufficiency program, which we monitor, where instead of paying an increase in rent when they have an increase in income, it goes into a special fund in their name. And at the end of 5 years, whatever money has been accumulated into that fund, they can get one lump sum, a check. They can either use that to put as a down payment for a home, condominium, co-op, use it for education for their children. But it's a program that, one of many programs that we provide in housing. And I think the more that commissioners in public housing interact with their residents, rather than putting a boot on their back, but give them a hand up rather than a hand out, these residents want the same for their children and their lives as we all do, the best for their kids. And I think that working closely with them, getting to know them, being part of their family, so to speak, goes a long way, because when they do have a problem, they come to you, whether it be a problem with a child, or drugs, or whatever it is. We interact with the police department, and we have community meetings with the police and people in public housing. So it's a, go back to what Kimberly said earlier, it takes a village. Well, it takes each and every one of us to be committed to the job that either they were elected to or the job that they decided to devote their time to, and to do it at 110%, not 100%. And I think that working closely with the residents, I have a great sense of pride that knowing that Greenwich Communities has fulfilled its obligation and will continue to fill its obligation to the community. And I think Greenwich is far better off for it, because we need everybody to work together. We need the nurses, the firemen, the policemen, the teachers to work in the community, the store clerks, and to have them live where they work is great because it helps the environment and cuts down on the pollution. So it is.
And you know, Sam, I just want to add that as you talk about your work in being a resource and support for those in the community, I think you have demonstrated it's for everyone that's in the community. There is no distinction between economics or anything. You have, and many of us are there for everyone in the community that goes through the challenge. And you're right. I think it ultimately goes to, we all want what's best for our family and our children, for them to aspire and succeed. And Sam, you deserve a lot of credit because you walk the walk, and I really appreciate that. Along the same vein of the question, Representative Wood, you're on the screen. Do you want to offer something? Or I know Representative Fiorello has another follow-up question.
No, I'm happy to listen, and I agree with many of the comments that have been made, and I certainly appreciate Francis's deep dive into the data, that it is a false narrative being perpetuated, and we need to look for solutions. And I always ask myself, as many of us do, legislators do, is when we look at pending legislation, what problem does this solve? And I think we have to be honest about what problem does this solve and what is a realistic solution and practical solution. So I'm looking forward to Facebook questions. Is somebody going to be feeding in the Facebook questions?
We have a number of questions. I know Kimberly
okay,
has a follow-up question.
Margarita.
Uh-oh.
If no, not an uh-oh, but in when we discuss private property rights, and you have, you know, individual homeowners that come before the P&Z meetings, and you do have a delicate balance between those who will have a NIMBY kind of mentality, and you and your role to ensure that developments can happen. They just have to happen within the letter of the law. Do you find that that you do learn a lot of new information that is relevant to the letter of the law, to health, safety, etc., that you didn't know, that did not come out in the POCD, but comes out because you do get a chance to hear from informed and concerned citizens who are not, you know, as one might portray, rabidly NIMBY, but more intelligent and thoughtful about the development of their towns?
You know, the quick answer to that is it's amazing how somebody can stand up and all of a sudden, bam, they have this brilliant piece of input that you haven't considered, an angle that you didn't know about, and you say, oh, great point, we'll go research that. And it changes how you look at something. So yes, does the public influence how we will go analyze something in the context of the regulations and in an application? Yes, absolutely. And we actually, I think we live to do that, to hear from people, because it makes it so interesting and it gives it so much depth. That's what you meant, right? That does it inform us? Does it inform us? Yes. And that's what we want to do. And sometimes people will raise an issue and it's just so interesting.
Could you give an example so people can really understand?
Of course not. I can't think of anything brilliant right now. I wish I could. I was like, I know all these great things have happened and I can't think of a single one. But probably when I go to sleep tonight, I'll suddenly say, oh, that was it. But I can't think of anything right now. But it does happen.
Can I ask a question that may be on thoughts of many of our listeners, that the sense of personal property rights and sometimes being misportrayed, that an individual took a look and looked to buy into a 1 acre zone lot when they make that purchase of their home, and they take care of it. They love the community, they love their home, they love the acreage which they went into a contract with, and then by the virtue of 830G, they get a 50 unit or 75 unit proposal. I hear so much that people's individual personal property rights have been abridged and violated. I'm sure you hear that a lot from a standpoint, and that is a very difficult challenge. Representative Fiorello did a fantastic job talking about home rule and the premise of it in our state of municipalities, being able to have some degree of self-determination. How do you feel in your interactions for all the participants about respecting individuals' personal property rights and not have the state, through a statutory guideline, literally ignore and obliterate it?
It's such an interesting question. It's such a difficult and interesting question. I always think about I-95. What if you had the beautiful house in a peaceful setting when I-95 came right through your backyard? What happens to you when you have that kind of taking? It's a very difficult thing. Sometimes people don't realize what zone they're in. And I had a question the other day from someone who was upset about how many subdivisions they were seeing in their neighborhood. But they actually have a small lot neighborhood that had oversized lots that could be subdivided. And that person had never been aware of that. And so they had an expectation that it would always look like that, but in fact, it could go a lot smaller. So that's a different side of it, which is the underlying zoning permits this to happen. And when you bought it, you needed to have done your research and known that. That it happened to me personally, that something subdivided next to me. And I thought I should keep my beautiful view, but those weren't the rules. So,
and
go ahead, Francis.
One of the things, Margarita, one of the things is, Tony is absolutely right about property rights here, but one of the things that influences the cost of a property is what the zoning is. So if you buy into a neighborhood where, for whatever reason, say there's inadequate well or the soil is inadequate for septic, you have large lots, that property will be worth less because you cannot subdivide it. And government can make and it can break the value of your property. And this is a really important point, because we know that most Americans, most households in this country, their primary source of savings is their home equity. The middle class in the United States is based upon home ownership. And incidentally, that's why it's so important to promote home ownership and to help people at the lower end of the market find a way to find a home that's affordable for them, and so they can also ride up the escalator of increasing home values and one day sell that home and have equity and be able to spend that on their family, have that intergenerational wealth. But if we look at what's being proposed right now, when you buy a home, you buy into a package. The property you buy has a certain value. The proposals before the state right now, being discussed right now, would meddle with that. They would create a lot of uncertainty about the value of a property. In some cases, you might be a winner. In some cases, you might be a loser. But given how critical home equity is to our society, we have to proceed very delicately and not do things that could bankrupt one family and unduly enrich another family.
Are you mute? Oh, all of a sudden you went dead, Tony.
Many people would wish that to happen more often, Margarita.
No,
I was just waiting for my co-host, my very capable co-host, to follow up with some questions. And Jamie, any thoughts on that thought as well?
I actually think about that all the time. And with the discussions within some of the proposals right now about significantly increasing the density of housing in certain areas, transit oriented is what they call it, around train stations, ferry stations, bus terminals. And I think about trying to put myself in the shoes of people that live in those single family housing zones, albeit relatively small lots anyway, because TOD development happens organically. It's happening organically in the town of Darien, and very well. I'm very excited about that. But I think about those folks that live in those wonderful starter home neighborhoods in the town of Darien near the Norotan Heights train station, who, depending on the outcome of this legislative session, might wake up to a developer buying the home next door and turning it into a 4 to 6 to 8 unit gentle density housing development. And with that comes a lot of other things, trying to balance traffic, parking. On-street parking is something that we don't have a lot of in the town of Darien, and that allows for a lot of pedestrian safety and bicycle safety because we don't have on-street parking. But the denser the development, reductions in required parking, which is also part of this proposal. You can't tell people how many cars they can have. So where are they going to park them? They would then park them on the street. So I think some of the proposals are theoretical. If you live near a train station, you don't have to have a car. You don't need a car. You can use the train for transit. But let's be honest on this call. The price of Metro North train tickets is very expensive. And a lot of middle income and lower income, they're simply not taking Metro North to get to their jobs. So it's a very complex topic, but I try and put myself in the shoes of those people that will be directly impacted. And I worry greatly about the outcome of this legislative session.
Thank you, Jamie. I share your concerns as well. And actually, on that vein, I have a question for Francis, which is that WestCog also covers cities. And as we focus on some of these ideas, what are the second and third possible unintended consequences to life in our cities? Could you comment on that?
Sure, I'll make a couple comments. One of the proposals right now would require multifamily housing by right at a municipality's primary train station. Well, if you look at the state of Connecticut, you have cities such as Bridgeport and New London that have one train station. And have they been consulted about how they want to develop in what has been their central business district? Would they be in favor of replacing offices with housing? I think it's very important that we listen to everybody around the state and see what they actually want. If we look at this proposal, there are a couple of ways it could go. We know the proposal really has no affordability component. There is, I guess, an assumption that if developers can build multifamily housing, they will build affordable multifamily housing. Now, I don't know if I personally agree to that because often developers find the greatest profit margin in the most expensive product. But if they build higher income multifamily housing by right in outlying areas, that's not really going to address the affordability challenges we see. It'll just have more luxury housing. If they do build more affordable housing in outlying areas, then we run into a really interesting situation because the projections, even with COVID, are that Connecticut's population is not going to grow. So the question is, who is going to occupy these housing units and where are they going to come from? If people want to move out of urban areas into suburban and exurban areas, fantastic. That's their choice. The challenge is the history of Connecticut the last 50 or 60 years has been one of disinvestment in the state cities. Hartford used to have 60,000 more people than it has today. This is not every city, but largely it's the Rust Belt pattern we see. And if we build more low to moderate income housing outside of the cities, without any overall state population growth, the most logical conclusion will be that people will move out of the cities into that housing. And who will move out of the cities? Probably not the neediest, because moving is very expensive and disruptive for a household. They'll probably be the most upwardly mobile people in those cities moving out. So one of the concerns we have at WestCog is that the proposals that are circulating right now do not represent a break with the past. They are not ushering us into a new future of social justice, but rather they are a continuation of the past. And they will further impoverish our cities by drawing out the middle class from the cities, There's literally no component in the proposals right now. There's no urban component. It's a completely, one could say, anti-urban proposal, and it's in an era where we understand the racial wealth gap and social justice needs so clearly. It's a really disturbing omission.
Wow. I know we scheduled to go to 7:15. If it's okay, I actually have one important question that I wanted to share with the board, and that is related to conservation, open space, environmental impact. If you read some of the statutes that I've gotten from WestCog in regards to a deep proposal, Department of Environmental Protection and Energy proposal that talked about some of our density housing zoning protections to protect watershed and to protect our open space. Could I ask for all of you I'll start with Jamie in regards to, the consideration and balance of open space and conservation and environmental impact that goes into account of how you design and plan and zone.
Absolutely. There's a lot of rules under which we have to operate by virtue of what comes down from the Department of Environmental Protection in Connecticut. We are a coastal community, as is Greenwich, of course. And so we're hypersensitive to the impacts of development and potentially overdevelopment on the health of the Long Island Sound and protecting our open space. Folks probably don't realize it, but the town of Darien is one of the most densely populated small towns in the state of Connecticut. But we prize keeping and preserving open space because we know that too makes for a very healthy environment and raises the desirability of communities for those that want that. Not everybody wants to live in an urban setting. Many people want to come to towns like Darien because we have trees and we have water and we have beautiful parks. It's a critical element for us. We struggled with one development recently, a big TOD development in our Norotan Heights district that was traditionally a very problematic flooding area. And we had to work with a developer to build a 1 million gallon detention basin to save a downstream park. So, there's a huge balance with development and environmental preservation. It's a very sensitive balance, and we work very, very hard to maintain that balance. And I'm concerned about overdeveloping and creating an imbalance that we certainly can't repair easily.
And if I may, Margarita, and how you collaborate as planning and zoning with your conservation and your watershed protection area, how you all coordinate with a common vision and goal to maintain the delicate balance that you have to keep.
Absolutely. It's one of our most important pieces of information in any decision we make. And we've been working very closely with our conservation department on changing regulations that will enhance our sustainability, our protection of the Long Island Sound. We require 15%, up to 15% open space set aside every time we approve a subdivision. But the most important thing, and we've been talking to WestCog about this, is that to some extent, this whole area in Connecticut, the southwestern corner, is a bit the lungs too of the greater metropolitan area because of our tree cover. So to the extent that we give up our open space, it's not just us that's being impacted. We're affecting a lot of urban residents for whom we are giving a benefit, a CO2 benefit. And the same thing holds true for the Long Island Sound, the protection of the Long Island Sound to keep it from becoming hypoxic, low in oxygen, and therefore less conducive to natural life, is very important because it affects all the area, Long Island, it affects the city, New York City, I mean. So not only do we think of it in the context of working very closely with our own conservation department, our own wetlands agency, but also in the greater context of the region, that there's a responsibility to look at the sustainability of the region. And with that, for that, we have Westcog to help us think through some of those issues. Does that, we also, as we've just last thing, mentioned this earlier on a webinar earlier today, not only do we have an affordable housing task force, but we have what we call a Greenscape task force. And we see them as parallel efforts. So we are trying to find opportunities to green at the same time that we're increasing housing diversity. And I do believe that that's the way towns should look at development, to try to maintain their sustainability. And again, to the point everybody's making, each town is different. Darien may not have the same opportunity. We have, we in Stamford have those big areas up in the backcountry, as we call it, that are undeveloped. But it's to think about that, and each town has to tailor, and that's why it's difficult with statewide standards. Francis, any thoughts on the things we've talked about? Sorry, I didn't mean to pass it on to Francis all the time, but I think he's smarter than I am.
Oh, no. You flatter me. No, what I would say, Margarita, is, these are not new challenges. 100 plus years ago, major cities and metropolitan areas in the country recognized that the country and the city are indelibly linked. And that is why they went on land acquisition, land buying sprees, and condemnation sprees, and instituted very strict land use regulation at the state level. You have to look only at the Catskills Park, the Adirondack Park, the Pine Barrens in New Jersey, the Quabbin in Boston, to recognize that we are all in this together. And when we look at zoning and housing, we cannot forget the environmental aspects to it, that land that is highly developed is not good land to produce drinking water. And so a lot of parts of the state in Connecticut, we don't have a Quabbin or a Pine Barrens or an Adirondack Park. We don't have state level regulation. We haven't condemned vast swaths of the state. We rely on local zoning to limit development intensity so that the land can still provide the ecosystem services necessary to deliver us clean drinking water, specifically to our urban areas. If we don't have that, we risk turning into a Flint, Michigan. And that is something we have to keep in the front of our mind as we consider any zoning reforms.
And we in fact denied an 830G because of wetlands issues. I can't remember, 2018 maybe, but we had to deny it because of a wetland problem, and we were upheld on that. And that's a very important thing.
And I think Francis is so great at giving us the bigger picture on these issues. But lastly, I'll give the word to Sam to speak about the importance of nature and the environment as he builds Greenwich communities.
Well, let me say this about an open space. It's sustainability. We can't, go into the 1 acre, 2 acre, 4 acre zone here in Greenwich and start developing that, because it does take away from the green space. You're talking about having to then sewer an area that's no longer not sewered, or bring water into an area where there are no water lines, expansion of our sewer plants, expansion of the water filtration plant. So zoning is very critical, and open space is very critical. And you speak of the Adirondacks. Well, I've had a home in the Adirondacks for about 20 years, and we go up there regularly. And zoning is an issue up there. I live in the Adirondack Park, actually. And I get involved in local zoning while and we are concerned about the same thing: the water quality, the lakes, runoff. So I think we're more stringent in the Adirondack Park than they are here in local zoning. So when we come into an area, we take all aspects of the development into consideration. We want to be inclusive in the neighborhood. We don't want to be the enemy coming into the neighborhood. We bring people in as part of the process. We hear all of the concerns before we get to Margarita. And then most of the time, we going in with very little opposition, because sustainability, green space we take into consideration, and we don't want to overbuild and have more of a burden on our infrastructure than necessary. But in the meantime, maintain the quality of life that we're all used to. And I think we're pretty much holding to that mission moving forward.
Thank you so much. I think, Tony, if I get the nod from you, I will start to close, which is basically that this conversation is a testament to the individuals, really the brains and the hearts that we have who care and lead our towns. So thank you so much, Jamie, First Selectman Jamie Stevenson, First Selectwoman of Darien, and Fred Camilla, who joined us earlier, First Selectman of Greenwich, and Kevin Moynihan, who joined us earlier, First Selectman of New Canaan, and Margarita Albin, Chair, our brilliant Chair of the Greenwich P&Z, and the amazing Sam Romeo, Chairman of Greenwich Communities, the towns, our town's Affordable Housing Authority. And Francis Pickering, thank you so much. It's always so great to be able to pick your brain, the Executive Director of West Connecticut Council of Government. And thank you, Terry Wood, State Rep from District 141, representing Norwalk and Darien, who also joined for this conversation. And a big thank you to my co-host, Tony Hwang. But I will leave it to you to close us out.
You know, as you can tell, I'm grateful for all of you, but I can't surpass the enthusiasm and gratitude demonstrated by Representative Fiorello. She is a huge fan of all of you, as I am. That being said, I really want to take a moment back and just kind of recap that the discussion in regards to the delicate balance between home rule of our communities versus the state oversight, the challenges in regards to existing statute and planning and zoning and 830G impact and the efforts in addressing not only the economic and the space issues, but also the past history of race and social justice. These are all important factors of consideration that we address today. Just touched upon. We need to delve much deeper into it. But also number three, in regards to many of the people who needed to have a voice heard, that their personal property rights need to be acknowledged as well. But I also want to take a step back and rehash that as I'm watching the feedback on our social media, that we should have a healthy dialogue and debate, that we have strong differences of opinion to vet out the process to create viable, sustainable, and realistic solutions that are important to solving the problem at hand for all of the state, every town, every community, every group. And this debate is important. We want to have that transparency. So as that I say that, we are going to do more of these town halls in different communities. We have one tentatively scheduled for January 28th with Norwalk, Westport, Weston, and Wilton. And then we're going to go up the coastline and incorporate Fairfield with Bridgeport. This is a question that affects every community. And I want the dialogue. I want the interaction, because what people need to see are the people like Margarita and Sam who give up their time and effort in a volunteer basis to do what is in the best interest of the people they represent. And I think everybody's striving to do that. And even for the passionate housing advocates, I respect you greatly. You are doing things out of your passion. And I hope that we can get to a position where we all work together and that acknowledge everybody is in this for the greater good, and that we should put away our dispersions. And tomorrow, with a new presidency going forward, what a great opportunity for us to begin now working together to solve the critical questions that confront all of us. And you being part of the solution and giving up your evening, and for the people that listened in, offer their passionate viewpoints, whether they agreed with us or not. This is what democracy is. And this is good government when we take all the viewpoints based upon fact and sift away the emotionality to create good policy. So again, thank you all for participating in this. This will be an ongoing dialogue. And a special thanks to all of the panelists who gave up their evening tonight and all the people that gave up their evening